72 years lived an entire lifetime of sacrifices. And this morning, a cold one in November, I discovered that to my daughter Fiona, I was nothing but a burden that needed to be discarded. My name is Constance Barnes, and I always believed that a mother's love was eternal and reciprocal. Until today. Until this morning when I went out to buy my medication at the pharmacy and forgot my blue wool coat hanging on the kitchen chair. The biting cold of Chicago forced me to return home, and it was then that I heard words that broke me inside. We have to send this old woman to a nursing home. I can't stand taking care of her anymore. The voice belonged to my Fiona, my only daughter, the one I carried in my arms for months, the one I nursed, the one I raised all by myself after her father walked out on us when she was just 5 years old. I froze in the hallway of the house I've lived in for 40 years, the same house where Fiona grew up, where she took her first steps, where she cried over her first teenage heartbreaks. My legs gave out when I heard the next words spoken by my son-in-law, Rick. "You're right, babe. This old lady is just an expense, and she still wants to run our house. Let's find a cheap nursing home fast. We can't keep wasting our money on her." Our house. This was my house, bought with the sweat of my labor as a cleaning lady for over 30 years, paying every single mortgage bill with absolute sacrifice. I took a deep breath, trying to control the shaking that was taking over my body. I grabbed my coat in silence and slipped out the back door like a thief in my own home. I couldn't believe that conversation was actually happening. Fiona, who I raised with so much devotion, who was always my absolute priority, was treating me like a nuisance. I walked down the street aimlessly, feeling every word echo in my mind like a death sentence. For these past 2 years, ever since Fiona married Rick and they moved in with me temporarily, I always tried to be useful. I cooked, I cleaned, I tended the garden, I helped with the groceries. I thought I was being a good mother, offering my home so they could save up some cash. Rick worked as a salesman at an appliance store, and Fiona was a receptionist at a private clinic. Together, they made decent money, but they always claimed they were saving up to buy a place of their own. Now, I was finding out that what they really wanted was to get rid of me. I walked back home after 2 hours of wandering the neighborhood, trying to process what I had just heard. Fiona was in the kitchen, fixing lunch, acting like absolutely nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom, took a while at the pharmacy today," she said, not even lifting her eyes from the stove. I looked at her, at this face I had known since her very first day on Earth, and I could no longer recognize the sweet girl I had raised. "Yeah, there was a line," I replied, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. Rick was in the living room watching TV, laughing at some comedy show, completely relaxed after having planned out my future like I was a piece of broken furniture. During lunch, I watched every gesture, every word, every look. Fiona plated the food in a rush, as if my presence at the table was a chore. Rick didn't even speak to me. He just chewed in silence, scrolling through his phone every few seconds. I tried to make small talk about the weather, about the news I'd caught on the television, but all I got were one-word answers. It was like I didn't exist anymore, like I was just a shadow taking up space at the dinner table. I finished my meal in silence and retreated to my bedroom, the only space in the house that still truly felt like mine. Sitting on the edge of the bed I shared with my late husband Joe for 25 years, I started to retrace my entire life. Joe died when Fiona was 17, taken by a massive heart attack. Back then, I was cleaning 3 different houses just to keep our family afloat. I remembered waking up at 5 in the morning in the pitch black, making breakfast for Fiona before heading out to work, coming back home at 7 at night, exhausted to the bone, but always putting on a smile for my daughter. On weekends, instead of resting, I took in laundry to wash and iron, scraping together extra cash to pay for her education. Fiona was always a smart, driven girl. She got a partial scholarship for a business degree, and I covered the rest of the tuition by working Sundays, scrubbing offices downtown. I remembered the worn-out shoes with holes in the soles that I wore for 2 straight years, just so I could buy the textbooks she needed. I remembered the days I ate nothing but bread and butter for lunch, so she could have a full hot meal. Every sacrifice was worth it when I saw the pride in her eyes, when she brought home straight A's, when she told me about her college projects, when she talked about her dreams for the future. When Fiona graduated, I wept with pure joy. I was right there in the front row of the auditorium, wearing my nicest dress, the same one I wore to the neighbors' weddings, clapping my hands raw for my girl. She landed a good job right after graduation, and for a few years we lived a quiet, peaceful life. She helped me with the household bills, gossiped with me about the guys she was dating, asked for my advice on major life decisions. We were friends, not just mother and daughter. Or at least, that's what I believed. Everything shifted when she met Rick 3 years ago. At first, he seemed like a polite, respectful young man. He greeted me warmly whenever he came to pick Fiona up for a date. He always brought me little gifts. He asked about my health. I was just happy seeing my daughter in love, thinking she had found herself a good man. Their wedding was a simple courthouse affair, followed by lunch at a small but cozy restaurant. I dipped into my savings to pay for part of the celebration, thrilled to see Fiona glowing on her special day. When they moved in with me, I welcomed them with open arms. The house had 3 bedrooms. Mine, the one that was always Fiona's, and a spare we used for storage. We rearranged everything so they'd be comfortable. I cleared out the space, even bought some new furniture for their room. "It's just until we save up for our own place, Mom," Fiona had told me. "We don't want to be a burden on you." A burden? I never once thought of them as a burden. They were my family, and family helps each other. For the first few months, everything was smooth. I cooked for everyone, kept the house tidy, did their laundry. Rick seemed happy with the arrangement, always complimenting my cooking, thanking me for taking care of things. Fiona was happy. She talked about their future plans, about the house they were going to buy, about the possibility of having kids. I felt useful and loved, an important piece of their lives. I thought I finally had the complete family I always dreamed of. My daughter, my son-in-law, and maybe soon a little grandchild to make our joy complete. But little by little, the tide turned. Rick started making these subtle, passive-aggressive comments about my habits, about the way I organize things. "Constance, you don't need to wash my clothes. I can do that," he'd say. But his tone dripped with annoyance, not gratitude. Fiona started losing her patience with me. She'd sigh heavily when I asked questions about her job. She'd show clear irritation if I took a little too long in the bathroom in the morning. Tiny things that, on their own, seemed harmless. But together, they were painting a picture I refused to look at. The dinner table conversations dried up. They talked exclusively to each other, about work stuff, about friends I had never met, about places they went without inviting me. I tried to chime in, but I could feel that my presence was merely tolerated, no longer wanted. Whenever I shared something about my day, about the neighbors or the news, all I got were distracted nods. Slowly, I started pulling back, talking less, trying to take up less space, as if shrinking myself could somehow reduce the annoyance I was apparently causing them. Months bled into years, and that house they were supposed to buy never materialized. There was always an excuse. The market was terrible, prices were too high, they wanted to wait for a better promotion at work. I never questioned it. After all, the house was big enough for all of us, and I liked having the company. I had no idea that in reality, they were banking my money to set themselves up, while actively scheming to kick me out. The blind faith of a loving mother shielded me from the truth unfolding right under my nose. In the last few months, things had gone from bad to worse. Rick barely hid his impatience when I was in the room. Fiona gave me one-word answers when I tried to talk to her. They went out every weekend and left me behind. They'd come back late, buzzing about the places they'd been, the people they'd seen, while I sat there like a stranger, eavesdropping on someone else's life. When I got sick, which happened a bit more often now at my age, I could tell they looked at my frailty as a massive inconvenience, not as a natural part of life that deserved a little grace and care. Now, sitting in this bedroom where I had lived so many beautiful moments, where I wept over my husband's death, where I dreamed of a future surrounded by my family's love, the reality finally hit me. To them, I wasn't a cherished elder who deserved respect and affection. I was an obstacle standing between them and the life they wanted. I was the inconvenient old bat that needed to be removed so they could be perfectly happy. The love I thought we shared was in truth just a forced tolerance born out of circumstance. I opened my closet and stared at the handful of dresses I owned, at my worn-out shoes, at the old photographs scattered across the dresser. In one of them, Fiona was about 10 years old, smiling brightly next to me at the park we used to visit on Sundays. We were happy then. Or at least, I thought we were. I picked up the photo with trembling hands and asked myself where it all started to rot. When did my daughter stop seeing me as her mother and start seeing me as a burden? When did love curdle into obligation, and obligation into disgust? I put the picture back in the drawer and locked eyes with my reflection in the mirror. I saw a 72-year-old woman, gray hair always neatly brushed, eyes that were tired but still carried a spark, hands permanently scarred by a lifetime of hard labor. This woman had dedicated every single day, every hour, every minute of her existence to the well-being of her daughter. She had surrendered her own dreams, the chance at a new romance after her husband passed, the trips she wanted to take, the things she wanted to buy, all in the name of a motherly love she foolishly thought was returned. That afternoon, while Fiona and Rick watched TV in the living room without giving me a second thought, I made a decision that would change the board entirely. I wasn't going to be the silent victim of their ingratitude. I was not going to let them ship me off to a nursing home like a busted couch. I had resources and rights they knew nothing about, and it was time to remind them exactly who owned this house. But first, I needed to get my ducks in a row, make some crucial phone calls, set up a few surprises they could never in a million years see coming. The woman looking back at me from the glass was no longer just the devoted, submissive mother. She was a woman who had broken her back working her whole life, who had built an estate with her own bare hands, who had raised a child solo, and who demanded respect. And if that respect wasn't going to come naturally out of love, it was going to come through other means. Fiona and Rick had no idea, but they were about to find out they had completely underestimated the woman they were planning to throw away. The days that followed that gut-wrenching discovery were the loneliest of my life, even though I was surrounded by the two people I loved most in this world. I woke up every morning at 6, just like I've done since the day I became a mother. But now, every time I opened my eyes, the weight of those words I heard that cold afternoon crushed my chest. We have to send this old woman to a nursing home. It rang in my head like a funeral bell, a constant reminder that my breathing in this house was viewed as a liability. I get out of bed slowly, not because of my age, but because every movement seems to physically ache more than it should. It's like my body absorbed the emotional betrayal and morphed it into physical pain. Fiona goes about her morning routine like nothing is wrong. She gulps down her coffee, scrolls through her phone, fixes her hair in the hallway mirror. When she sees me making my own coffee, she hits me with a robotic, "Morning, Mom," without ever meeting my eyes. Rick doesn't even do that. He just grabs his backpack and walks out the door like I'm part of the drywall. Their ice-cold demeanor cuts right through me, but now I know why. To them, I don't exist as a human being anymore. I'm just a logistical problem they need to solve. During the quiet mornings while they're at work, I pace through the house I built with so much love and sacrifice. Every single room holds precious memories that now taste like ash. In the kitchen, I remember the mornings I woke up before the sun to make breakfast for Fiona when she was cramming for her SATs. I'd stand right there in the dark, waiting for the water to boil, dreaming of how incredible it would be when she got into college. How many times did I fight off sleep just so she could have a hot meal before her exams? How many nights did I stay awake until the early hours when she was out late on dates, waiting to hear the key turn in the lock, just to know she was safe? In the living room, my eyes always drift to the shelf where I keep the family albums. There's a picture of Fiona's college graduation. We're hugging, beaming at the camera. I was so incredibly proud that day, wearing the navy blue dress I bought specifically for the occasion. It was one of the few times I spent money on myself without agonizing over it. Fiona looked radiant in her cap and gown, gripping that diploma like it was the Holy Grail. To me, it was. It was the physical proof that all the sacrifices had paid off, that my daughter had secured a better future than mine. Now, staring at that exact same photo, I wonder if the joy on Fiona's face was genuine, or if even back then she saw my sacrifices as a given, as a baseline obligation I owed her. Did she ever truly grasp what it meant for a cleaning lady to pay for a private college? Did she understand that every single tuition check I wrote meant months of quiet deprivation, of cheap meals, patched-up clothes, and delayed dreams? The afternoons are even worse. I sit on the porch and watch the neighbors going about their day, everyone carrying their own lives, their own burdens, their own joys. Mrs. Rose, who lives next door, always waves when she sees me. Sometimes she stops to chat about the garden, the weather, the soap operas we both follow. It's idle talk, but it's the only time all day I feel truly seen and heard. Mrs. Rose treats me like a real person, with opinions and feelings, not like a nuisance that has to be endured. During these chats, I realize how different my voice sounds when I talk to her. It's firmer, more grounded. It sounds like the old Constance, the woman who raised a kid alone, who juggled multiple jobs, who made the hard calls. But when I talk to Fiona and Rick, my voice shrinks. It gets hesitant, like I'm asking for permission to breathe the air in my own home. How did I get here? How did I let myself become this small? At night when they get home from work, the tension in the house is thick enough to cut with a knife. I cook dinner just like I always have, but now I study their reactions. Rick chews in total silence, glued to his screen, answering work emails or mindlessly scrolling. Fiona eats like it's a race, like she wants to get it over with so she can escape my presence. When I try to make conversation, asking how their day was, I get clipped, impatient responses. "It was fine, Mom. Work was fine. Nothing much happened." I try to pinpoint the exact moment we stopped having real conversations. Fiona used to tell me everything about her coworkers, the projects she was managing, her weekend plans. I knew her friends' names. I knew who she liked and who drove her crazy at the office. I was always in the loop. Now she lives like a boarder in my house, guarding her privacy, as if I'm some sort of untrustworthy spy. After dinner, they retreat to their room or crash on the couch to watch TV. I wash the dishes in silence, trying not to clink the plates, terrified of bothering them. Sometimes I hear laughter drifting from the living room, and my chest tightens, knowing they're only happy when I'm out of sight. Do they count the minutes until I go to bed? Do they let out a massive sigh of relief when they can finally kick back without my inconvenient shadow looming over them? On the nights I can't sleep, I lie in the dark and trace the timeline of how our relationship decayed. When Fiona was a teenager, even during the worst of her rebellious phases, there was always love and an unbreakable bond between us. She came to me when she was crying. She shared her victories with me. She asked for my take on boys and drama. We were a team facing down a hard world. I was her confidant, her ally, her biggest cheerleader. The shift started slowly when she went off to college. It made sense that she wanted independence, that she spent more time with her classmates, building a life outside these walls. I understood that. I pushed for it even. I wanted her to taste the world, meet new people, do the things I never got to do. But maybe without either of us noticing, that was when I stopped being her mother and started being just the woman who paid the bills and kept the lights on. When she got her first real job after graduation, our dynamic shifted again. Fiona was making her own money, carrying professional weight, building a career. She chipped in for the house bills, which made me incredibly proud and grateful, but it changed the rules of engagement. We weren't just mother and daughter anymore. We were two adult women splitting a roof and the chores that came with it. Maybe that's exactly where I lost my footing in her life. I was no longer the sole provider and protector. Now she was a provider too. I was no longer the center of her universe. There were coworkers, friends, and boyfriends all fighting for her time and affection. I slowly faded into the background. A permanent fixture, sure, but no longer essential. Then Rick entered the picture, and that sealed the deal. Suddenly, there was a new leading man taking up the space that used to be mine, and that's how life goes. She was in love, getting serious, looking to start her own family. But for me, after 25 years of being the most important person in my daughter's world, the transition was a jagged pill to swallow. Early on, I tried to pull Rick into our orbit. I cooked his favorite meals, asked about his job, tried to figure out what made him tick. He was polite, respectful, but he always kept me at arm's length. He wasn't rude or nasty. He just didn't see me as a pillar in his life. I was his girlfriend's mother, a background extra in his movie, someone who came with the package, but held no real weight. When they tied the knot and moved into my place, I held on to the hope that we could mold ourselves into a real family. I pictured late-night talks on the couch, big Sunday dinners, maybe even a baby crawling around to bring some fresh light into the house. I thought Rick would learn to see me as a warm, loving mother-in-law. I thought Fiona would appreciate having her mom right there to help steer the ship. I thought I could be useful and loved at the same time. But the reality was entirely different from day one. They acted like a couple renting a room, not like a family sharing a home. They had their own schedules, their own inside jokes, their own plans that completely bypassed me. I held the deed to the house, but I felt like an unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome by a decade. Weekends were brutal. Fiona and Rick would go out for brunch, hit the movies, visit his parents, meet up with friends. They rarely invited me along. And whenever I floated the idea of doing something together, I was met with a polite, bulletproof excuse. "Oh, Mom, we're grabbing drinks with Rick's work friends today. We're doing lunch at his folks' place. It'd be kind of weird if you tagged along. It's just a couples thing, you know how it is." I knew how it was, or at least I pretended to. But it stung sitting in that empty house listening to the silence tick by while they were out living it up. It burned to know I was completely written out of the script, that my presence was a complication rather than a joy. Slowly, I stopped pitching ideas. I stopped asking where they were going when they walked out smelling like perfume and cologne. I stopped showing any interest in being a part of their lives. Dinner conversations became painfully shallow. They talked about things I had no clue about, people from the office bars they went to without me, politics that didn't involve me. When I tried to throw my 2 cents in, I could see them listening out of sheer obligation, not curiosity. My little updates about the TV shows I liked, the local news, or the neighbors felt utterly pathetic compared to the high-stakes world they were discussing. Little by little, the silence became my blanket. It was easier to just shut my mouth than to try and force my way into conversations where the door was clearly locked. It was less humiliating to eat without speaking than to ask a question and get an eye roll in return. I faded out. I became a ghost haunting my own hallways, trying to take up the absolute minimum amount of square footage, trying not to step on any toes, trying to be as utterly invisible as humanly possible. But invisibility comes with a heavy tax. When you stop speaking, people stop listening. When you stop participating, people stop including you. When you shrink yourself down to nothing, people start forgetting you're even in the room. That is exactly what happened to me. I tried to play the perfect mother and the flawless mother-in-law. No demands, no drama, zero dead weight. And the grand finale of all that effort was that they actually started looking at me like dead weight that needed to be hauled off. Last night, after they shut their bedroom door, I sat alone at the kitchen island with a mug of tea, just chewing on all of this. The house was dead quiet, but my brain was a loud, chaotic mess of memories and hard questions. How does a woman who raised a kid single-handedly, who broke her back her whole life, who built a rock-solid estate from scratch, become so small and pathetic? How did I let them turn me into a phantom in my own damn house? The answer hurt worse than I thought it would. I did it to myself. I erased myself voluntarily, convinced that playing small made me a better mother. I stripped away my personality, my wants, my absolute dignity, believing it would buy me their love. But love bought with self-erasure isn't love at all. It's just pity in a cheap suit, and pity always runs out. Now, sitting in this kitchen where I've cooked thousands of meals infused with love, where I held Fiona through her darkest days, where I cheered for her biggest wins, the fog finally lifted. The time for being invisible was over. It was time to remember exactly who the hell I am, what I built, and what I am owed. And if they couldn't find it in their hearts to love and respect me on their own, it was time to teach them a brutal lesson about taking things for granted. Fiona and Rick have no clue that the woman they're planning to toss out like yesterday's trash has the kind of leverage and grit they can't even fathom. They don't know that the simple widow they ignore every morning is actually a woman who hustled for decades and stacked up a lot more than meets the eye. They don't know that the submissive mother who swallows their disrespect with a smile is about to show them exactly what she's made of. Tomorrow, while they're sitting at their desks, I'm going to make some moves. I have calls to make, documents to audit, triggers to pull. The Constance Barnes they think they know is about to peel off a mask I've worn for way too long. And by the time they realize who I really am and what I really own, it's going to be far too late to patch up the crater they blasted into our relationship. For now, I'll play the part. I'll keep up the silent routine, watching every heavy sigh, every eye roll, every little piece of evidence that they want me gone. But beneath the surface, something lethal is waking up. Something that has been hibernating through years of submission and self-sacrifice. The warrior who raised a child on her own is clawing her way back to the top. And this time, she isn't shrinking for anybody. Thursday morning broke differently for me, even if Fiona and Rick were too blind to notice. I woke up at 5:30, a half hour early, with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in a decade. For the first time since I overheard that sickening conversation about the nursing home, the anvil on my chest was gone. Instead, there was a strange electric current running through my veins, a feeling I had completely forgotten the raw power of having a purpose, a mission. I got out of bed with a fire I hadn't shown in months. I fixed my hair with extra care and put on my blue blouse, the one that always made me feel 10 feet tall. While I brewed the coffee, I watched Fiona and Rick drag themselves through their robotic morning routine. They barely glanced at me per usual, too buried in their screens and their own little worlds to see the shift in the room. Rick whined that the coffee was too weak. Fiona let out a dramatic sigh because she forgot to sort her laundry. Minor inconveniences that they usually deflected onto me, acting like I was the root cause of every bad thing in their lives. But this time, instead of shrinking or feeling guilty, I just smiled to myself. Pretty soon, weak coffee was going to be the absolute least of their problems. Once they drove off to work, I marched into my bedroom and pulled open the dresser drawer where I kept the heavy paperwork. It had been years since I seriously looked at these files. I always knew things were secure, but I never bothered to run the exact numbers. I sat on the bed and started treating every page like a crime scene. The deed to the house was in my name, obviously, but there were details I had brushed aside. The property wasn't just the house. It included a decent-sized empty lot in the back that I scooped up years ago, and that dirt was now worth a small fortune. I also dug out the savings booklets I had opened over the decades. One was from when Fiona was just a kid, where I religiously dumped small handfuls of cash every single month, even when we were eating scraps. The other was more recent, holding the cash I'd hoarded over the last few years once my personal expenses dropped to zero, because I simply stopped spending a dime on myself. The bottom line shocked me. I was sitting on a lot more than I realized. Decades of penny pinching and quiet deprivation had snowballed into a very serious nest egg. It was enough to buy me total, untouchable independence for the rest of my life. But the piece of paper that really made my heart pound was one I had entirely forgotten about. A life insurance policy Joe took out years before his heart gave out. I was the sole beneficiary. The payout had been sitting in an account quietly gathering interest year after year, and it had mutated into a massive sum. Over all these years, I had only skimmed a tiny fraction of it for absolute emergencies, locking the rest away for a rainy day. Well, it looked like a hurricane had finally hit. I grabbed my phone and dialed the bank where I kept the bulk of my money. "Good morning. I need to speak with a manager regarding my financial portfolio," I told the operator. She patched me through to Mr. Parker, a sharp, polite guy who had known my family for years. "Mrs. Barnes, what a pleasure. How can I help you today?" I laid it out plain. I needed a full audit of my assets and wanted to sit down in person to make some major structural changes. "Absolutely, Mrs. Barnes. Can I have you come in tomorrow at 10 a.m.? I'll pull a comprehensive report on all your accounts and investments." I booked it on the spot. It was exactly what I needed. A cold, hard, professional look at my actual firepower. After decades of living like a mouse, it was time to see exactly how big my guns were and how to aim them. My second call was to the county clerk's office where the deed was filed. I needed to verify a few legal blind spots and know exactly where I stood as the property owner. The clerk was incredibly helpful. She confirmed that as the sole name on the deed, I had God-tier authority over the property. I could sell it, rent it, or legally evict the current occupants if I felt like it. "You have absolute rights to the property, Mrs. Barnes. Anyone living there is doing so purely by your permission and generosity." Permission and generosity. Those three words echoed in my skull like a gunshot. Fiona and Rick were sleeping under my roof through my permission and my generosity, not by divine right. They had completely deleted that massive detail from their brains, treating me like an unwanted squatter in my own kingdom. It was time to give them a brutal refresher course on reality, but I wasn't going to do it with screaming matches or throwing plates. There are much cleaner, deadlier ways to deliver a message. Friday morning, I walked into the bank, right on schedule. Mr. Parker ushered me into his office, offered me coffee and cookies, and treated me with a level of respect I had forgotten I was owed. Mrs. Barnes, I ran the full diagnostic on your portfolio, and I have to say I am incredibly impressed. You have built a fortress here. He slid spreadsheets across the desk, pointing at numbers that genuinely made my jaw drop. Between the savings, the mutual funds, Joe's insurance money, and the auto investments I had set up and forgotten about, I had enough liquid cash to live like a queen for decades, completely off the grid. How long has it been since you actively managed these accounts? Mr. Parker asked. I confessed it had been years. I had left everything on autopilot while I focused on playing the martyr for my family. Well, maybe it's time we talk about diversifying. With this kind of capital, you could easily step into real estate. The market is very friendly to cash buyers right now. Real estate that got my gears turning. I asked him what was out there, and Mr. Parker started pulling up listings for smaller condos in the area. Turnkey places perfect for someone looking for a low-maintenance, highly independent setup. There are some gorgeous units downtown, Mrs. Barnes. 2-bedroom spots, highly walkable with all the high-end amenities a woman in your position would appreciate. It would be a bulletproof investment, and honestly, a fantastic primary residence if you ever wanted to downsize and get some real privacy. Privacy. Independence. Those words sounded like a symphony. I told Mr. Parker to print out a curated list of properties that fit my cash budget. He promised he'd have a full dossier ready by Monday. Photos, specs, the works. Are you thinking about relocating? He asked, his curiosity wrapped in professional politeness. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I was analyzing all my strategic options for the future, and I wanted to be fully armed for any scenario. Through the weekend, I played my part flawlessly, but inside my brain was a war room. Fiona and Rick took off Saturday afternoon for lunch and didn't drag themselves back until Sunday night per the usual script. They didn't invite me, of course, but this time the sting of rejection was gone. I used the empty house to map out my endgame. I wasn't going to move on emotion or impulse. This was going to be a surgical strike. Monday morning, the second they pulled out of the driveway, I was back in Mr. Parker's office looking at the dossier. 3 units caught my eye immediately. One was a sleek 2-bedroom in a modern high-rise downtown, complete with a 24-hour doorman and a fitness center. The second was a slightly smaller unit tucked away in a quiet, leafy neighborhood, perfect for someone who wanted zero drama. The third was a tiny but stunning penthouse with a terrace that overlooked a city park. Would you like to tour any of these, Mrs. Barnes? Mr. Parker asked. I picked the first 2. We locked in the showings for Tuesday and Wednesday morning. I felt a rush of pure adrenaline I hadn't felt since I was in my 20s. The sheer possibility of having a space with my name on the door, where no one looked at me like a rotting piece of wood. A place where I could just be Constance Barnes, not the irritating mother or the nightmare mother-in-law. On Tuesday, I toured the downtown high-rise. The lobby was all marble and polished brass, staffed by guys in sharp suits. The unit was on the 8th floor. Massive bedrooms, a sprawling living room with a balcony, a chef's kitchen, and a bathroom that looked like a spa. The floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the place with natural light and a view of the skyline. I pictured myself sipping coffee on that balcony, reading a thriller in the living room, cooking exactly what I wanted in that pristine kitchen. It's the ultimate setup for someone who wants total independence and luxury, the broker pitched. The building has biometric security, and you're a block away from the best grocery stores, banks, and pharmacies. You would be treated like royalty here. I loved it, but I wanted to see the second option before pulling the trigger. Wednesday, I walked into the quieter neighborhood unit. It was smaller than the high-rise, but it had soul. 3rd floor of a beautifully maintained pre-war building. It featured a massive master bedroom, a cozy living room, and a galley kitchen that was incredibly functional. But the kicker? A beautiful sunroom where I could build a jungle of houseplants. The windows looked out over a street lined with ancient oak trees, so quiet you could hear the birds fighting over branches. This unit is perfect if you want absolute peace, the realtor explained. The neighborhood is incredibly safe, highly walkable, and the building is mostly older professionals who respect the silence. You'd feel right at home here. And I really did. The second I walked in, my blood pressure dropped. I just knew deep in my bones that this was the place where I could restart my life with my head held high. I drove back to my house with my heart hammering against my ribs, not from anxiety, but from pure, unadulterated anticipation. For the first time in decades, I was building a blueprint for me, making calls based on what I wanted, not what everyone else needed to siphon out of me. Constance Barnes, the woman who had buried herself alive, was clawing her way out of the dirt. And she had the cash to make it happen. At dinner that night, I looked at Fiona and Rick like I was watching a documentary. They chewed their food in dead silence, their faces glowing in the blue light of their phones, blind to the ghost sitting across from them. Rick grumbled that the steak was a little tough. Fiona whined about how slammed she was at the clinic, the usual surface-level garbage that completely iced me out. But this time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt liberated. The clock was ticking on how much longer I had to endure this freezing indifference. This daily reminder that I was a squatter in my own home. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Mom," Fiona mumbled, not even bothering to look up from Instagram. "You feeling okay?" I told her I was fantastic, just lost in thought. She grunted in response and went back to typing. Neither of them had the brain power to realize I was a completely different animal now, that there was a loaded gun sitting at the table with them. They were so used to treating me like wallpaper that they couldn't see the demolition crew setting up the dynamite right under their chairs. Thursday morning, I pulled the pin. I called Mr. Parker and told him I wanted to make an aggressive, all-cash offer on the quiet neighborhood condo. "Brilliant move, Mrs. Barnes. That property is a perfect match. I'll get the seller's broker on the phone right now." I also ordered him to liquidate the necessary funds and have the cash primed and ready in my checking account so I could close with brutal speed. "Are you planning to move immediately?" he asked. I told him I was still mapping out the logistics, but when the hammer dropped, I wanted the money ready to fly. No delays. I wanted a loaded weapon. "Very strategic of you. Always good to have the escape hatch greased," he said. He had no idea how right he was. I was going to need that escape hatch, and now the hinges were oiled. I spent the rest of the week tying up loose ends like a mob boss. I vetted a premium moving company and put them on standby. I researched heavy-duty commercial cleaners just in case I decided to leave the old house sterilized before the bomb went off. I walked through the rooms, taking a mental inventory of what I actually cared about. It was shockingly little. 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears boiled down to a few cardboard boxes. The old photo albums, the simple jewelry, Joe bought me a handful of books I loved, my clothes, and a few kitchen knives that had sentimental value. Everything else, the heavy oak furniture, the expensive appliances, the rugs, could stay. I was starting a new life, and I wanted to travel light. Let the vultures fight over the heavy lifting. As I mentally packed, I pictured the exact look on Fiona and Rick's faces when they walked in and found the letter. It wasn't going to be a manifesto of rage or a screaming match on paper. It was going to be a cold, hard statement of facts. I knew they would lose their minds when they realized the fragile old lady they were scheming to institutionalize had just hijacked her own narrative with terrifying efficiency. Late Friday afternoon, I sat at the kitchen counter to write the execution order. I weighed every single syllable. I didn't want it dripping with cheap bitterness, but I wanted it to hit like a freight train. "Dear Fiona and Rick," I started. "By the time you read this, I will have made a move that alters our reality permanently. Last Thursday, when I walked out to get my medication and forgot my coat, I came back inside and overheard a conversation that provided absolute clarity on exactly how you view me. I kept writing, laying out how their plot to dump me in a nursing home forced me to realize I had become a parasite in my own house. I wrote about the decades of grinding labor, about breaking my back to give Fiona everything, about opening my doors and my wallet to both of them, foolishly expecting basic human decency in return. But I've learned that love cannot be extracted by force or bought with favors, I wrote. And human dignity is not a currency you trade for sheer tolerance. So I have decided to solve your little problem with extreme prejudice." I kept the pen moving. "You no longer need to stress over finding a cheap facility to stash me in, because I have secured my own future. I bought myself a beautiful condo with my own cash, where I can live in absolute peace, without being treated like a rotting piece of furniture. Effective tomorrow, this house is entirely yours to manage, just like you always wanted. I explained that I was leaving the house fully furnished as a parting gift, but that the financial umbilical cord was officially cut. You are grown, capable adults with steady paychecks, I wrote. I have absolute faith that you can manage the property taxes, the utilities, and the upkeep without my irritating interference. I didn't explicitly spell out that they were now essentially my uncontracted tenants. I'd let that financial landmine detonate later. A masterclass in never taking the golden goose for granted. I wrapped up the letter stating that I wasn't carrying any hate in my heart, only a profound grief for the family we used to be. I hope you build a wonderful life together, I wrote, and I hope you learn to value what you have before you burn it to the ground, because the real world doesn't hand out second chances. I signed it. With love but no illusions. Constance Barnes. I slapped the envelope on the kitchen island right next to a spare set of keys and walked into my bedroom for one final night. I lay down on the mattress where I had slept next to Joe for decades, where I had built castles in the sky about a house full of grandkids, where I had mourned a dead husband and eventually a dead relationship with my daughter. I didn't feel a drop of sadness or nostalgia, just a cold titanium peace. I was finally holding the steering wheel of my own life. Fiona and Rick rolled in around 10 o'clock, laughing loudly about some movie they'd just seen. I heard the front door shut. I heard them joking around in the living room. I heard their bedroom door click shut. They didn't bother poking their heads in to say goodnight. They hadn't done that in months. They didn't care if I was breathing, if I was sick, if I needed a glass of water. It was the standard operating procedure. I was a ghost, strictly invisible until I accidentally rattled my chains. Sunday morning, I woke up early and brewed a massive pot of coffee, playing my role to the final curtain. Fiona and Rick dragged themselves downstairs around 9, still buzzing about their Saturday night. I sat at the table and memorized their faces, burning this final family breakfast into my brain. They ate like zombies, scrolling through TikTok, throwing out ideas for what they wanted to do with their lazy Sunday. They were completely blind to the crosshairs on their foreheads. They didn't feel the air pressure dropping in the room. At 2 o'clock sharp, the heavy diesel engine of the moving truck rumbled in the driveway. Fiona and Rick were glued to the TV when the doorbell rang. "Who the hell is that?" Fiona groaned, peeling herself off the couch. I listened to the chaotic exchange at the front door, the foreman asking for Constance Barnes, holding a clipboard, explaining his crew was here to pack and load the designated cargo. "You've got the wrong house, buddy," Fiona snapped. "My mother isn't moving anywhere." I walked down the stairs, slow and steady, wearing my sharpest dress, clutching my leather handbag stuffed with the closing documents. "He's got the right house, Fiona," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. "They're here for my things." The annoyance on her face instantly melted into sheer, unadulterated shock. Rick shot up from the recliner, looking like he'd just been hit with a stun gun. "What the hell is going on here? What is this about a move?" I walked straight to the kitchen island, picked up the envelope, and held it out. "Everything you need to know is right here," I said, dropping it into Fiona's shaking hands. "You two can read it together," while they tore the envelope open. I turned to the foreman and pointed out the specific boxes I had marked that morning. The crew moved like a tactical unit, fast and quiet, clearly sensing they had walked into a domestic war zone. "Mom, what kind of sick joke is this?" Fiona screamed the second she finished the letter. "You can't just pack up and leave. This is your house. This is your life." Rick was ghost white, running his hands through his hair, a full-blown panic attack setting in. "Constance, this is insane. We never said we wanted you out on the street." I looked at him, my heart beating at a perfectly calm resting rate. "You didn't say it to my face, Rick," I replied. "But I heard you pricing out nursing homes on Thursday. You thought I was deaf, but my hearing is perfectly fine." The silence in that living room was deafening. Fiona and Rick stared at each other, the color completely draining from their faces as the memory of their little plotting session crashed down on them. They realized they had been caught red-handed treating my life like a logistical hurdle they could just jump over. "Mom, we were worried about your safety," Fiona stammered, her voice cracking. "We thought maybe a specialized facility." "Cut the crap, Fiona," I interrupted, my voice dropping an octave. You were worried about the inconvenience I was causing your social life, and you know what? You were absolutely right. I was inconveniencing myself. I was living in a house where I was treated like a stray dog, trying to squeeze blood from a stone. So I fixed the glitch. Permanently. Rick tried to pivot playing the diplomat. Constance, look, even if we said some stupid things out of frustration, that doesn't mean we want you gone. This is your house. You have every right to stay here. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. Oh, now it's my house. Funny how the narrative shifts the second you realize you're about to be holding the bag for the mortgage and the water bill. The movers were hauling the last of my boxes out the front door. "What are you talking about?" Fiona whispered, a new kind of terror lighting up her eyes. "I'm talking about the fact that you two have operated under the delusion that this house was your birthright, without ever pausing to think about whose name is on the deed, who pays the property tax, and who keeps the lights on." I watched the math finally compute in their heads, the sheer panic of realizing what I had just done to them. "Mom," Fiona choked out, tears finally spilling over. "You're not going to leave us homeless, are you?" I looked at the daughter I had bled for, standing tall in my new armor. "Fiona, you are two fully capable adults with steady incomes. I'm sure you'll figure out a housing solution that fits your budget. As for me, my housing is secured." I pulled the shiny new keys out of my bag and let them dangle in the air. I bought a beautiful penthouse. Cash. A place where I can live in absolute peace, where I'm not a burden, and where I can wake up every single morning knowing I am the queen of my own castle. The foreman walked in, wiped his brow, and told me the truck was loaded. I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed for the door. "You can't do this to us," Rick shouted, his polite mask completely shattering. "We took care of you for years. We deserve some damn respect." I stopped in the doorway and slowly turned around to look at him one last time. "Did you take care of me, Rick? Or did you tolerate my existence in exchange for free rent, hot meals, and a maid service? There is a massive difference between caring for someone and bleeding them dry." Fiona broke down, sobbing. "Mom, please don't walk out like this. We can sit down. We can fix this." A tiny splinter of pain caught in my chest watching my little girl cry, but I slammed the door on it. "Fiona, some words can't be put back in the box. Some actions can't be scrubbed away. You had years to show me an ounce of grace, and you chose to treat me like a tumor. Now you get to live with the biopsy." I walked down the front steps toward the black car, waiting to take me to my new life. "The house is clean and fully furnished," I threw over my shoulder. "Consider it a parting gift. As for the rest of your lives, you're going to have to build it with your own hands, just like I did." I slid into the back seat and told the driver to hit the gas. Through the tinted window, I watched Fiona and Rick standing on the porch, completely paralyzed by the shock of realizing that the woman they had treated like a doormat was actually made of reinforced steel. The drive to my new condo was a hurricane of emotions. I grieved the family that died in that house, but the sheer relief of finally holding the reins of my own life overpowered it. I missed the good times, sure, but the high of proving that my dignity was not up for negotiation was intoxicating. When the car pulled up to my new building, I looked up at the windows of my sanctuary, and for the first time in a decade, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. From this day forward, the mornings were mine. The money was mine. The choices were mine. There would be no more heavy sighs, no more eye rolls, no more whispered plots about how to dispose of me. Just peace, respect, and the absolute freedom to be exactly who I am. Constance Barnes, an unstoppable force who demands respect. Fiona and Rick learned the hard way that some lessons come with a catastrophic price tag, and underestimating the quiet ones is the deadliest mistake you can make. 3 months have passed since the day I walked out of the house I lived in for 40 years. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that I have never been more at peace. I wake up at 6 every morning, not because I have a hungry family to feed, but because my body likes the rhythm. The difference is I wake up in a fortress of absolute tranquility. My condo is exactly what I dreamed it would be, a sanctuary where I can just breathe, without having to shrink or justify my existence to fit someone else's narrative. The sheer blue curtains I picked out let in the perfect amount of morning sun. The first thing I hear isn't the slamming of cabinet doors, but the birds nesting in the oak tree right outside my window. My morning routine has become a ritual of self-worship that I forgot was even legal. I roll out of bed whenever I feel like it, brew a cup of pitch-black, sugary coffee, and sit out on the sunroom couch, just watching the world wake up. Nobody sighs when I take a long shower. Nobody rolls their eyes if I play jazz a little too loud. The suffocating feeling of being an inconvenience just for drawing breath is completely gone. During these quiet hours, it blows my mind how strange it is to meet yourself again at 72. For decades, my entire identity was changed to being Fiona's mother, Joe's widow, the workhorse who kept everyone else's engine running while she bled out. Now, for the first time in forever, I am just Constance, a woman who keeps orchids alive, who devours old mystery paperbacks, who knits while listening to talk radio, who actually talks to people in the elevator without rushing off to serve someone else. Mrs. Marina, my next-door neighbor, has become a genuine friend. She's 75, a widow like me, and she bought her unit the second her kids grew up and started their own lives. "Best trigger I ever pulled," she told me one afternoon down in the lobby. "I've got my privacy, my checkbook, and if I want company, I know where the door is." We drink wine, talk about books, swap recipes, and dissect the news. It's effortless. Just two women who chose to die on their feet, rather than live on their knees begging for their kids' approval. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I sit in on a knitting circle down in the building's rec room. It's 6 of us, all around the same age, all with similar stories of kids who grew up and flew the coop. But this isn't a support group for bitter old hags. These are women who found immense power in their independence. Women who realized that true happiness isn't about being desperately needed by someone else, but about being entirely sufficient on your own. Sometimes we talk about our kids, but it's balanced. No theatrics. Mrs. Esther says her boys come over every Sunday for a roast, but Monday through Saturday, she's off the clock. Mrs. Carroll flies out to see her daughter in Texas twice a year, but has zero desire to move in with her. A mother's love doesn't have to be a chokehold, Carol always says, and a kid's respect shouldn't have to be extracted with pliers. Saturdays, I take a slow walk down to the local farmer's market. It's a tiny thing, but it gives me a massive rush of dopamine. I buy exactly what I want to eat in the exact portions I need, without factoring in anyone else's allergies or whining. Sometimes I drop $40 on a bottle of wine just for Saturday night. Sometimes I buy fresh lilies for the coffee table. Sometimes I grab weird ingredients to test a recipe I saw on a cooking show. Tiny luxuries I had completely written out of my life. The guy who runs the produce stand knows my face and saves the best heirloom tomatoes for me. The girl at the bakery knows my name and asks about my week. Tiny human interactions that make me feel seen, validated, not just tolerated like a leaky pipe that hasn't been fixed yet. It is wild how those tiny drops of basic human decency can completely rewire how you feel about yourself. Over these last 3 months, Fiona has tried to breach the wall a dozen times. At first, she was calling frantically, leaving voicemails, crying, begging for forgiveness, claiming I had totally misunderstood the context, swearing that if I just came back, everything would go back to normal. "Mom, please call me back. This is tearing us apart," one voicemail pleaded. But I had crossed the Rubicon, and the bridge was ashes. When the radio silence stretched into weeks, the calls slowed down, but the texts got desperate. Fiona started dripping details about how hard it was keeping the house afloat with just Rick's paycheck, how the property taxes were bleeding them dry, how everything was infinitely harder than they ever calculated. She slipped in that they were looking for a cheap apartment to rent because the house was eating them alive. It was exactly what I knew would happen. The brutal hammer of reality, smashing into 2 kids who thought the magic money fairy lived in the guest bedroom. Rick tried to play his hand, too. His texts were totally different, cold, calculated, zero emotion. He tried to pitch me on how he had learned his lesson, how he was ready to step up and be a real son-in-law, how he would give me all the space I needed if I just moved back in and took over the bills. But it was just a sales pitch from a drowning man. He didn't want a mother, he wanted a bailout. I left every single message on read, because I finally figured out that when someone shows you they hold you in contempt, you don't stick around to negotiate. 2 weeks ago, the perimeter was breached. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon. I was reading on the sunroom couch, and the front desk buzzed up. Fiona was in the lobby begging to come up. My knee-jerk reaction was to tell the doorman to bounce her, but I figured it was time to put a final titanium lid on this coffin, crush whatever lingering hope she had of tapping my accounts. When I opened my front door, the girl standing there looked nothing like the Fiona I knew. She had dropped weight. She had dark bags under her eyes, and she radiated an exhaustion that went straight to the bone. "Hey, Mom," she whispered. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, keeping my posture rigid and my face completely blank. I wasn't going to let a polite cup of coffee get mistaken for a peace treaty. She walked in, scanning the high ceilings and the expensive furniture, her jaw practically hitting the floor. "Wow, it's gorgeous in here, Mom. You really set this up perfectly." I poured her a coffee, strictly out of Southern hospitality, not because I wanted her to stay long. We sat in the living room. I took the plush armchair I bought exclusively for my own spine. She took the sofa. "Mom, I came here to give you a real apology." Fiona started, her hands shaking around the mug. "I know I gutted you. I know I said unforgivable things. I treated you like garbage, and you didn't deserve a second of it. I was drowning in stress, but it doesn't excuse what I did." I sat there like a statue, listening to every cadence of her voice, trying to gauge if this was genuine remorse or just a tactical retreat because her bank account was hitting zero. "Rick and I are drowning financially," she confessed. "We never had any idea how much cash it takes to keep a house running. You made it look effortless. You never complained. Now I see exactly how much blood you were sweating to keep a roof over our heads." It was fascinating how quickly financial terror could clear up a person's vision, making them see the sacrifices they happily ignored when the gravy train was running on time. "Fiona," I finally said, my voice dead calm, "I accept your apology, but it doesn't change the board. The issue wasn't just you two plotting to throw me in a home. The issue was the years of slow, grinding disrespect, the way you looked right through me, the way you operated like I was put on this earth exclusively to serve you. That conversation I overheard was just the bullet that finally put the sick dog down." I saw the tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't reach for a tissue. "For years, I carved pieces off myself trying to buy your love. I stopped talking so I wouldn't annoy you. I killed my own opinions to keep the peace. I erased Constance Barnes just so I could be a convenient ghost in your house. And when I realized that even after giving you my blood, you still looked at me like a parasite, I decided it was time to buy my dignity back." "But you're my mother," Fiona cried out, her voice cracking. "Families forgive. Families fight through the mud together." I gave her a sad, tight smile. "Fiona, I swallowed that lie for decades. But family isn't just shared DNA. Family is mutual respect. It's actually giving a damn about the other person by choice, not out of guilt. When the respect evaporates, all you have left is a biological technicality. And biology doesn't pay for a healthy relationship." Fiona sat in dead silence, letting the gravity of those words crush her. Finally, she looked up, her mascara running. "So what? You never want to see me again? You're just done with us?" I took a slow breath. "It means the old dynamic is dead and buried. I am no longer the punching bag who writes checks to buy your affection. You are going to have to figure out how to look at me as a human being, with boundaries and teeth. If you can do that, maybe down the road we grab a coffee. But going back to the way it was, that is never happening." She lingered for a few more minutes, throwing out Hail Marys, trying to secure a promise for Sunday dinners, but I held the line. When I finally walked her to the door, I saw the exact moment it clicked in her brain the vault was sealed. The ATM was closed. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a permanent paradigm shift built on self-preservation. Since that day, the frantic calls stopped. No more surprise ambushes in the lobby. I get a sterile text on holidays or my birthday. I reply with a polite, closed-ended thank you. No emojis, no warmth. It is a relationship entirely dictated by the ironclad boundaries I built around my life. Yesterday, during knitting, Mrs. Carroll brought up a segment she saw on the news about a massive wave of seniors actively choosing to buy their own independence rather than moving into the spare bedroom with their kids. It's a whole movement, she said. Boomers with cash are pulling the plug. They want their own rules, their own space, and zero guilt trips. I smiled at my needles because I didn't feel like a statistic. I just felt like a woman who woke up from a coma. The kicker, Carol went on, is the kids' reaction. They think the parents are going senile or being selfish or just throwing a tantrum. They literally cannot process the concept that their parents want a life that doesn't revolve around being a free babysitter or a live-in maid. That was the exact pathology Fiona and Rick suffered from. They physically could not compute that I had a soul, a desire, or a need that didn't involve serving them on a silver platter. Today, as I water the orchids in my sunroom, I look back at the chaotic left turn my life took at 72. I learned that the clock never runs out on a reboot. It is never too late to snatch your dignity out of the fire. It is never too late to choose a lonely respect over a crowded humiliation. The people in this building look at me and see a sharp, independent woman with a loaded bank account, not a tragic victim begging for scraps of affection. My new reality isn't a Hollywood movie. It's quiet. It's slow. Yeah, sometimes it's a little lonely, but it is 100% mine. Built on my terms. Funded by my sweat. Completely immune to anyone else's convenience. I wake up every morning knowing I own the next 24 hours. I pull the levers. I make the calls. I don't need a hall pass to exist in my own kitchen. Sometimes I'll look out the glass down at the park and see a big family walking together, and a quick flash of grief hits me for the illusion I used to believe in. But it burns off fast because I know what I had wasn't a family. It was a hostage situation wrapped in a mortgage. I will take a dignified, quiet room over a loud house full of leeches any day of the week. If I could beam a message into the heads of every woman my age who is currently playing the martyr for ungrateful kids, it would be this. It is never too late to cash out and buy your spine back. Stop shrinking yourself so other people can feel tall. Stop waiting for the people who are draining your blood to suddenly hand you a bandage. You are a complete, terrifying force all on your own. Respect is not a favor they grant you, it is a tax you collect. And sometimes, the most profound act of self-love is looking at a toxic room smiling and burning the building down on your way out. The empire I've built over these last 3 months isn't flawless, but it is brutally authentic. It is a life where my head hits the pillow in absolute peace, where every check I write is for my own joy, where I don't have to apologize for casting a shadow. It is a life where the absolute silence I chose to walk into speaks infinitely louder than the screams I left behind. We're curious to know how far this story has traveled. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below.